we'll get this on to online for anybody who wasn't able to make it today. All right, so I am sharing my screen. And I'm putting this sucker into present mode. All right. Can everybody see the screen all right?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So today we're talking about security incident response, and particularly lessons from the field, lessons from actually being out there and doing this over time, and kind of gathering some of the lessons learned over the course of some years. This little video here on the front is somebody coming up to the race line and taking off. This is the attacker in all these situations, right? They probably took off an hour ago, 4 hours ago, but they're ahead of you. And so you need to have a plan of attack to kind of catch up and get back ahead. And we've got some tips and tricks for that today. Specifically, what you're going to see today is not a prepackaged how to do security incident response. It's not a framework. It's a collection of those lessons learned from years of making mistakes, realizing that you need something different when you thought you needed one thing. And what I'm hoping that everyone is doing as they see this is to think about their own environments, their own applications, their own infrastructure, right? And then look for maybe some nuggets that you can take home to improve your own security process, not look for something to replace your existing process. So why would you want to listen to me about any of this? I've got 15 years of experience in a variety of roles in technology. I've been kind of a frontline technology responder. I've been in management positions for those people. I've been in the service side of technology, being the front line for working with users who accounts or workstations have been compromised. I've been involved in all of these roles. So 15 years means I've got to make a lot of mistakes and learn a lot of lessons. And all those different roles means I got to make a lot of different kind of mistakes. So I have a great diversity of mistakes made in my career. And I've been around long enough that I'm comfortable sharing that, and hopefully those can be lessons for other people as well. Like I said, I'm a security engineer for an organization in healthcare. And so when I think about security, right, every day I'm looking at protecting patient PHI. I need to meet HIPAA and high trust compliance needs. And particularly on our security team here at Healthwise, I'm the team subject matter expert for identity and access management. So looking at sign-in logs, protecting things with MFA, things of that nature, making sure the right people have access to the right things at the right time. So in a big sense, here's kind of how we think about security incident response in terms of kind of unique stages that occur from the beginning of realizing that something is going wrong to actually calling it done. We've finished dealing with this incident, right? So the stages are preparation, alerting and initial response, containment, investigation, remediation, and report, retro, and follow-up. We'll kind of dive into each of those sections throughout this presentation. So a key piece of preparation, and something that you'll hear as a theme throughout this presentation, is that preparation and practicing are more than half the battle, right? In terms of feeling like you have a good incident response plan in place and a kind of incident response process to help you to deal with these things. One of the main components that you have is you have to have a plan, right? And you may have a very minimal plan. You may have a very large plan that has come from compliance requirements or engagements with outside contractors, things that are very formal. But whatever plan that you have, or if you're building your own plan, you really need it to have two particular qualities. The plan needs to be actionable, and it needs to be available. And when I talk about actionable, it means that this document can't be a 100-page document that you are searching through the pages in the index to find where do I start for step one. A lot of times these plans are required by your company policy or the compliance frameworks that you are dealing with. And so you need to know how to handle it. And sometimes if they get very big and they have to be really big, the way to do that is to break them out into smaller sections, right? That are much easier to kind of digest in the heat of the moment. Playbooks in particular can be just how to start with an initial response and where everybody meets and how we communicate to, in this type of security incident scenario, say malware or data breach, right? These are the things that we need to do, right? So make it digestible enough that the people needing to deal with it can actually, use it as an asset and not a hindrance to responding to a security incident. Like I said, you got to get those communication channels and expectations in place. And this is surprisingly more important than you might expect, especially in a world where we're now completely remote for each other. There's no huddle around somebody's desk anymore, right? So when we talk about communication, what we do is we establish a channel in our persistent chat solution, right? Your Teams or your Slack. And you say, this is where everybody on the team is going to meet to deal with this. And oftentimes we'll even have a different room that is a bigger war room where leaders of the organization can get involved. Because if the security incident is significant enough, you're going to almost immediately get people from upper management asking for updates. They're going to want to know. And that can tend to slow down your technical first responders. So we'll talk about a little bit more about that a little later, but you need to kind of set those things up in the beginning. You want to have specific roles for the key personnel on your team. Leverage the subject matter expertise that your team has. Somebody may have expertise in the file servers, the audit logs, the web application firewall, the corporate firewall. Make sure that you get people to the spot where they can best utilize their expertise and help you begin catching up, so to speak, in the race against whoever is attacking your environment. Another important piece is make sure the plan has contact info for the people who are going to be responding to your security incidents. We talked a little bit about mistakes as a reason for being able to share some of this knowledge. And a great example of a mistake is your contacts may exist in your Exchange or your mail system, right? What happens if an attacker is attacking your mail system where the contacts are available and that your phone goes to look for those things, and you don't have your manager's number, your teammate's number. I've lived that experience. That was a very hard lesson to need to call up the chief financial officer of the company and say, I don't have my manager's phone number on my, in some other form. Can you give that to me? And so that's something I've remembered for a long time. So make sure that you've got some of that key information outside of your technical systems. So it's not going to be interrupted by whatever is occurring. And also the plan has to be available, right? Sometimes these things get created for compliance reasons and they will exist on the compliance officer's desk, on their desktop, on their workstation, right? It needs to be in a centralized place that everybody knows how to get at it. I mean, that's one of the most important preparation pieces that you can do. People don't even know where to pull up the plan. I mean, you're in big trouble from the start. So make sure that it can be potentially in a cloud location. We use stuff like Confluence, right? Where our documentation is out there. If there's an attack occurring against our environment, it's unlikely that that also will be disrupted at the same time. So that leaves us in a pretty good spot. And there's mobile applications that we can have on our devices where I can pull that up from where we're at and get at it. So talking a little bit more preparation with your tool set. In your environment, you have a variety of tools that you're going to use in any kind of incident response scenario. We use tools that allow us to see timelines associated with workstations, with the network traffic that is flowing in and out of our networks and or coming from our users and infrastructure devices. We have web application firewalls that are watching requests coming into our applications. And at the end of the day, in a security incident response scenario, you're going to have to tell a story, right, to your management, to your team, what occurred, right, and what do we need to do about it. And so take the opportunity before a security incident happens to simulate an attack on your own environment, and then look and say, is the logging sufficient? Is the logging level sufficient that I could tell like what occurred here, right? Do all these components really tell the story, or can I provide myself an opportunity to adjust that, dial it up a little bit, and so I have a lot of confidence that I can tell the story if an attack occurs, right? You're going to need timelines and that detail of logging at multiple different layers in the stack, right? Application logs, network, identity, right? All those things come together to form a complete picture, right? You may see a network request coming from someplace going to some IP address or some URL, but if you can combine that with some action that was taken on the workstation, that a user opened the browser and initiated that request, or that the request was initiated from somewhere else, you have a better picture of what occurred and kind of what you're dealing with. So make sure you have enough tools at enough layers that you can tell a complete story. And then also, this is a particularly a chance for learning hard lessons, is once you're confident in your tool set and that you can tell a complete story, is your tool set dependent on a certain set of conditions being in place to actually tell that story, right? So like we use the example of being able to see a timeline of user events on a workstation, right? Well, maybe that tool is an application that you install on your organization's owned workstations. But what if somebody's working on their personal laptop at the moment, right? That tool is not going to exist on that machine, right? What if you're able to capture all this network traffic because you expect them to be on a certain device on the corporate VPN, right? And they don't need the VPN to get to these assets, right? There might be conditions in which your tool set is almost completely blind. And you really need to consider going one of two directions at that point, right? Do you need to expand your tool set to cover these additional scenarios? Or do you need to begin limiting these scenarios? If your tool set only works with a corporate workstation involved, you might want to look at preventing BYOD in your environment. But you don't want to end up in a scenario where you thought you had everything you needed, and then this particular use case meant you've got nothing. Practice in terms of being ready for incident response is critical. And so what we've learned over time has been you have to do it frequently. We tend to do it every 3 to 6 months, and that can kind of fluctuate up and down depending on if we have new members of the team or how long it's been since we've done it. But it needs to be regular enough where you're gonna retain what you get from the practice over time. Once a year, in my opinion, is not frequently enough, but maybe 6 months works for your team and your environment. The practice has to be as real as you can make it. And it should reveal things where people maybe have a conceptual understanding of what needs to be done, but maybe they don't understand exactly how to perform something. And so examples that we've seen over time have been, if your practice scenario is that somebody is attacking the databases of your application and there's sensitive data in those databases, and you ask somebody, how would you respond? They might know all the right things to say. They'll say, well, I would get in there, we would look at the audit logs for how to see who kind of access this environment. We would deal with kind of disabling any kind of network communications coming in and out. And they might know all the right things to say, but really your question has to be at that point. It says, okay, show me that you know how to see those logs. They might know that they need to see the logs, but where specifically do the logs live? Show me that you know how to access the logs. Show me you know the tool that allows you to even view those logs, right? Do you know if you have access to the logs? And the point of this is not to, it's not a gotcha thing, but it's a way to help reveal blind spots in the team. I've sat in that chair in a practice scenario and knew the answer to say, but when I got asked the question, okay, show me how you would do that. Show me how you would trigger alerting all the rest of your team members. I'll actually go, wow, actually, I need to bring up the documentation. I don't know that right off the top of my head. And an answer of, I don't know, but I know where we documented how to do that is always an acceptable answer, right? That's why you do those things. Nobody can be expected to keep all of these things in their memory banks ready to go at all times. So another thing you want to do is make it fun and try to gamify it. We've had previous leaders at our organization that really did some good work here, where we run through these scenarios and we make them as likely to be scenarios that could happen as possible. But then we'll also introduce a element of chance to it, right? And we'll bring dice to it. And so we'll go through a scenario and we will say, what's the first step that you're going to do? Somebody might say, we're going to, send out the alert to bring everybody into the agreed upon communication channel. And that person will be given a die and asked to roll it. And if they roll a 1, the response is, your phone's battery is dead, or there's something wrong with your laptop. What's your plan B, right? And so it makes it fun, and it also allows you to realize that you might need a plan B for a certain situation. You're already in a scenario where things are not going ideally. It's quite possible that other parts of it could also not go ideally. Somebody could be out of town, somebody could be asleep and not answer their phone. Those are real things that can happen in an incident. And so gamifying it, so to speak, helps make the simulation a little more real. And also emphasize the need to engage the team as early as possible, right? The idea that an attacker is ahead of you, which is the situation in every incident, right? You need a way to catch up. And the response is not about an individual, it's about the team kind of quickly being leveraged and brought to trying to handle this situation. We've had times where we have greatly skilled technical people on the team who in our practices will work a long time to try to figure out like what could be going on, but they won't actually take the first step of engaging the rest of their teammates, right, to help them. And so you can kind of help identify and help get that hero idea out of people's minds a little bit. It's okay to just immediately bring everybody in, right? That's kind of what we want to do. It's a team response, not an individual response. So coordinating with leadership before incidents happen, right? It's really important to work with your manager, your leadership around expectations, around what might occur in some of these incident responses, right? There are scenarios in which you might need to take down somebody's account that's been compromised that might be out on the road. There may be a scenario significant enough where you need to actually cut network access to your applications that you're hosting and are selling to the world, because leaving them up will cause more damage than accepting an outage to the applications. And you don't want to find yourself in a scenario where you're not on the same page as your management around that. Let them know that you might need to take those steps, and if you feel they're necessary, that you will take those steps, and work out any conversation around that ahead of time, rather than having them that be a big surprise to them during an actual incident. Also give them some expectations around communications. One of the things that we've learned over time is that if you have a single communication channel where you have the technical responders and leadership, beyond having, a half dozen people in a room or 10, it starts to hinder communications. And so we keep separate channels for the responders and a channel for the leaders, and we have the security operations manager kind of live between those two worlds. And they will come into where the people are fighting the fire, ask for an update, and then that person will go back over to the larger war room where the leaders are at, and then provide them an update. And that keeps everybody focused on what they need to do. And get any kind of expectations in policy where it's applicable. Not every kind of expectation needs to be in policy, but if you can get an agreement around, an account can be disabled at any time when a security incident is suspected, right? Get it into policy, get it into some of the statements around acceptable use for your employees and staff. And so they know that what the deal is, and your security team has some protection from policy when they have to take actions in an emergency situation. All right. And one of the most important things is, where are the crown jewels, right? As a security team and a security professional, we are focused on protecting our organizations from something, right? But what is it that you're protecting, right? It's important to be specific about this, because it's likely that you're protecting a whole world of things. And there's going to be a certain set of data that is most critical, most important. Data that it being affected is going to be the worst case scenario for your organization, right? For us in healthcare, right, it's customer PHI and the personal health data that we have to maintain and encounter, right? If you're in a finance, it's potentially the financial records. It could be intellectual property for an organization, but know what those things are and know specifically where they live, because one of the most important things that you're going to be asked to answer in a scenario like this is, were our most sensitive assets affected, right? And the quicker you can say yes or no to that, will help your incident response. And you won't be able to do that if you don't know exactly where those things live. If that data lives in a database, what database specifically, right? How can those things be accessed? It can be usernames and passwords of employees, username and passwords of local accounts. It can be database connection strings, right? And so we need to know how all of these things can be accessed, all the routes at them, to really be able to evaluate quickly if we have some ongoing risk or if something's been affected. A great lesson learned over time has been, who are actually your highest risk accounts, right? I think in general, in security and technology, sometimes we think of our system administrators, our security people, whoever has the most permissions in an environment, you might think of as your highest risk accounts. And those ones are critical, but what about your database administrator? If your sensitive assets live in a database, they have all the permissions to those most sensitive assets. They have a reason to be there, right? and they are frequently connected to those assets. Whereas a system administrator, I might have permissions, but I don't ever really access those things in the performance of my daily job. And so those accounts become ones that you need to really focus security training on, monitoring if you think that's necessary. Evaluate those, your high risk accounts in kind of a new light, and think about who's there, because we have a lot of great tools that evaluate like behavior, right? That will even track and behavior and say people are likely to do this, and then they're doing something out of the ordinary, make that an alert. But for, in this example, your database admin, they're there every day. It's never going to trigger an abnormal behavior, and so you have less help from your tools in those scenarios. And know quickly how to evaluate when things have been affected, right? This goes back to how do you get at the audit logs, things of that nature, and knowing what your environment, what's normal for your environment, right? It's pretty difficult to look for anomalous activity if you don't know what normal looks like. You start looking through logs and you see errors or strange things. Do we always have those things? Is that new? For your most sensitive assets, kind of look into reviewing those things ahead of time every so often, just to kind of have an idea of what normal looks like. All right. Alerting. The time component of incident response is critical. Like I've said a few times, you're behind from the start in this race. And so you need to know that the race has begun as soon as possible. And so you might have some great tools in your environment that are sending you email alerts or sending alerts to your persistent chat channel. But is somebody going to see that at 3 in the morning? Attackers do take business hours into account and hope that you don't have a mature, alerting service in place to send things out to a security team or the appropriate part of your organization, right? If you can get a page in the middle of the night and you are 5 minutes behind somebody getting into your environment, that's a big difference than coming in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and opening your email and seeing all the alerts from 9 o'clock last night. So make sure that stuff is getting to the people that need to get it as fast as they can. And also have a way to alert all of the team members simultaneously without needing to call everybody, right? Time is of the essence, get everybody in. And so we call this our bat signal, and it's an email address that we can trigger that then simultaneously alerts everybody on the team, even those who are not currently the member on call. And so that may or may not work for you, but in terms of shaving off minutes, in terms of a response time, something like that can be a great asset. All right, initial response. It's important to be clear about the severity of the incident, and if you have this larger plan that may have come from compliance and policy needs, a lot of times they will have formal decision trees around, if this is a critical incident, take this step of actions. If it is not, take this step of actions. And so one of the first things that you need to do is determine if that is what level of incident you're in, so you know that you're following the game plan that you've established ahead of time, right? Utilize your whole team as quickly as possible in the initial response. I'm going to beat that drum quite a bit. The breaking out of roles is, if you have 6 people in the call, right, that's excellent. You brought your team in, but you need to start breaking tasks off for people. You need to say, Joe, I need you to look at the SQL audit logs. Sue, I need you to look at the firewall logs, and parcel that out so everybody is beginning to work at the same time, and you can really bring the full weight of your team to bear on this. As part of that, once everybody kind of splits out to their different tasks and assignments, we need to have a communication channel where people can report in what's going on. And that can be as simple as a chat channel where people say, these logs were reviewed, nothing of concern found. And they just add that into the chat channel. And the chat channel can give you a timestamp, right, of when that occurred. Likely at the end of this, right, and you do some reporting and you talk to people about how this went, you're going to be reviewing the timeline of your response. And so rather than thinking back later and saying, I wish we had kept track of what we did and what time we did it, just throw it into a chat channel, let that take care of that, and you've got your timeline kind of built out for you. In addition to doing all of these things very quickly, probably the most important thing is don't freak out. The number one step in our incident response plans of operational or security, right, have always been traditionally, stop, take a breath, don't freak out. That's in our formal documentation, right? Don't make it worse. Breathe, clear your head, and then start executing, right? It's that extra 30 seconds of starting your incident response while you're still in freak out mode is not gonna help you. It's only gonna hurt you. So take a minute to breathe. And we talked a little bit about the communication channels here. All right, containment. So when I talk about containment, we're talking about creating the fire break around the incident, right? When you're in containment mode, you are not necessarily deep dive investigating everything that has occurred. We're stopping the bleeding. We're creating the fire break, right? We are disabling the account that's been compromised. We are blocking the network traffic that is sending the malicious traffic at our applications. We need to stop the active event, right? Stop it to the point where we feel like we can take a breath and then transition into some of these deeper dive modes that we're going to talk about. When you get to containment, it's about getting to that point of being able to take a breath quickly, right? So have a bias for action, right? Disable those things that you suspect are not in a healthy state or have been compromised, right? This ties in with the preparation around letting people know that you may be taking these actions and they may have, outage consequences or disruptions to productivity. And then also understand what your containment options really do. A couple of these examples are from my own learning as a kind of an identity person, where I've thought that my containment option of disabling an account would immediately stop all access to certain things. And what we've actually learned over time is disabling an account doesn't always mean that it immediately cuts access in all systems, right? People have ongoing access tokens to web services, and so you may need to also revoke tokens, right? Ultimately, the key part of this is, test your containment options in certain scenarios and see if they actually do what you think they're going to do. You might think that you add a rule to a web application firewall that will stop a certain type of malicious traffic, and it doesn't, or it actually starts affecting legitimate traffic. Test these things out, know what they do, so that you don't, throw up your hands and take your action and say, there's no way this incident is still occurring. I've taken this action, and actually it's still going on behind the scenes. So once you've got containment in place, you feel like you've got a moment to breathe, that's when we start moving into like the deeper investigation phase of things. And so again, we want to focus on our areas of greatest concern, the most critical assets, right? Now we're going to be able to deep dive everything to make sure that nothing has occurred that's going to put us in a worst case scenario. It's important to establish a time window as tight as possible around your incident as you begin to deep dive investigation. right? You might have a great SIM or logging tools, but the more data that you ask for, the longer it takes to get that data back and to analyze it. And so we want to get to a spot where we realize the event started right at 12 o'clock. We completed containment at 1 o'clock. And so then now we have a 1 hour window that we can then really deep dive all the logs, all the tools that we have to then say, we feel really confident that we can do that. And it's not taking a long time to even get the tools to return some of that data. If you can utilize some pre-bit tools or queries and be prepared in that sense, that's going to be hugely helpful to you. You can't anticipate all the scenarios that you might find yourself in, but an example of an area that we are leveraging some pre-built tools is around working with database audit logs. And so in an incident, we realized that reviewing SQL database audit logs can take a long time, especially in databases that actually get a lot of traffic and churn. And we were able to have a member of our team who's skilled in automation make a tool that allows us to quickly evaluate those, right? And it's knowing how to work with the resource that you're looking at, and also combining that with knowing what's normal for your environment. So the customization in that tool is, it's really just utilizing the standard PowerShell module for SQL Server, but it's also then got code in there that says, we know this is normal for our environment. Disregard activity of that kind. Only show me activity that it would be strange for us. And something that retires the whole team to kind of look line by line through logs, right? Now you can run a short command line utility, and it's going to pop those things out for you right off the bat, and that's going to save a lot of time. As I've talked to before, right? It can be critical to say what didn't occur, right? The worst case scenario is not at play here, right? We're investigating what's happened. But if you can rule certain things out, that helps people calm down, reduces the stress on you as you continue to kind of deep dive investigate. Or it lets you know if you can't rule it out and you continue not being able to rule it out, that we may need to engage outside parties or engage the more critical parts of our security incident plans. And so in terms of remediation, one thought exercise that I think is worth going through is, as an example, how quickly could you rotate the secrets to your most critical applications, right? And how confident would you be of not causing an outage? This is another case of, you can't anticipate every scenario, but you might be able to anticipate in your environment something around a critical asset that would be a huge pain to try to change to if secrets or credentials were stolen, right? And these type of things, you know, when they change, tend to break things, right? And so you could find yourself in a spot where you have a security incident ongoing, right? It's going towards your most sensitive assets, and you believe that they have a credential or a secret that allows them to get at that data. And so you're going to have huge pressure to act quickly, and you're going to be in a position where how are you going to do this has not really been figured out before. And so you're going to have to figure that out on the fly under this pressure. And that's when bad things happen, right? That's when outages happen. That's when you tend to shoot yourself in the foot. And so anywhere that you can anticipate some of this stuff, maybe come up with these procedures ahead of time, you know, you're doing your future self a big favor. In terms of the internal report phase, right? This is getting a summary of the incident out to your team, your leadership, some select leadership in your organization. right? You want to build out the detailed timelines that you're getting with your tools, and you want to consider splitting those out across having kind of multiple parallel timelines, right? You're going to end up with, if you got good tools, you're going to end up with a huge amount of data. It gets very hard to read and hard to consume, follow what might be occurring, right? The report is meant to communicate something to someone, right? This is around educate them on what's occurred and ongoing risks. Too much data that isn't organized well is not going to be supportive of that. So also consider who's going to be the audience for the incident report that you write around what's occurred, right? Some executive leadership is going to have maybe 5 minutes to look at this, right? You need to get everything that you need them to know out of this immediately, right? An incident occurred. It happened this way. Our ongoing risk is low, right? We can confirm that, the most secure assets were not affected, right? They walk out of that, they feel like they know everything they need to know. Other people at other layers in the organization are going to have different needs, and so be sure to provide summaries for those people as well. And then after that part is done, you're going to want to do an internal retrospective with the team. We find this to be pretty helpful. And we go over what went well, what could have gone better, and what we can do to improve. That's just kind of a standard retro for that you'll find in Agile and Scrum processes. Around security, I like to focus on the non-technical pieces as much or more than the technical, right? Did we communicate well? Did we get engaged as a team quickly, right? Those things that we practice, did we take those learnings and actually execute on them, or do we need more practice, right? The technical piece of this, these things often are wildly different from time to time, but there's some key components that are the same every time. And if you do those well, then you know that you got a good chance. Part of that is that we also suggest, what we can do to improve. What are we going to make an internal tool to allow us to move more quickly in one stage of this? Are we going to come up with a predefined way to rotate certain secrets? You have to be realistic about what you can do. I would say pretty much everybody I know in this field of work is extremely busy and is also pretty good at their jobs. And so they could think of 1,000 different ways that things could have been better. If I had this thing, it would have been better, right? Start with a list and then whittle those down to 2 or 3. I mean, really get it down and say, these are the items that we're going to stop everything and we're going to do now, right? If it's just one item that you do for an improvement, creating that tool or something else along those lines, actually doing one item is worth much more than 10 great ideas that end up in your backlog to die and rot away over time that you'll never get to. And then the report out to leadership, right? After you're done investigating, you've got a good handle on what the story is around this incident and all the remediations. You want to go talk to your leadership, even leadership that may not have a huge interest in security. Get with them. Take it as an opportunity to educate them on the real risks that your organization faces, because it's highly likely that they don't have a great handle on what you and your team do in some respects, or they know a little bit about what those worst case scenarios would be, but they don't know how real or likely those things are. And so take it as an opportunity to educate, be honest about what you don't know. And this is critical for dealing with people. There will always be something that you don't know. You will never have 100% complete story of exactly what occurred, why somebody did what they did. And so just as valuable as saying, we have a high level of certainty that this occurred and that these things did not occur. What we still don't know for sure and can't know for sure at this point is if they did this or why they did this, right? And so be clear about that. And you can utilize those conversations, because if a leader comes back and says, well, why can't you give me the whole story in that area? Sometimes the answer is, right now we don't have the tool set that we need to tell that part of the story, but there is tools on the market that would allow us to do that if you support it and you want to allocate budget for that and time for people to execute on that. Or you can really kind of drive that forward and help them understand the support that you need to provide them what they need. The other great thing about reporting out to leadership is that this is a real world example for why you do what you do. So if you've been in conversations with leadership around changes, policy changes, technical control changes in your environment, and where they say, I don't know, it seems like it would be more disruptive than helpful, you now have a real world example fresh in everyone's mind where you can gain support for your security projects. And you can say, if this thing was in place, this part of this would not have occurred. And that can be a powerful argument in getting what you need for your team. And then again, help them understand how your team does what it does, why it needs the people that it needs, why it needs the expertise that it needs to be able to kind of protect the environment. A lot of times the leaders are going to look at you as kind of a great asset, right? Because there are worst case scenarios where they don't want to get on the phone to the customer and say, about that sensitive data that you trusted us with, yeah, we lost that, right? And so you are a line of protection from them ever having to make some phone calls like that. And so they should be hugely supportive of you. All right. So to wrap this up, incident response is a team sport, right? Get the heroes together, make your superhero squad. It's not about one person trying to do everything. You need your whole team to be engaged and to play catch up and to kind of win these battles. The preparation and practice are more than half the battle, right? Everything you can do to know where your assets are and all the things that we've discussed really make things easier to handle in the heat of the moment. Your mind goes into a different state in these scenarios, and everything you've done to kind of prep yourself and support yourself going into that really increases the likelihood of success. And right, use your process to be better prepared for the next incident. That's your retro, right? Do the follow-up items that you agree to that will put you in a better spot for the next time. And talk with your leaders and tell them what happened and what could have been different if certain things were different, or if you had additional tools, right? Take the opportunity there and set yourself up better for the next time, because there always is going to be a next time. So that is the presentation. Happy to open it up for any kind of conversation or questions at this point.
Hey, Luke, I was just wondering if you had some tips for getting management support for making security changes that may affect user experience. So, when you come out of an incident like this and you've got a few things you want to lock down a little bit more, how do you get management on board?
Yeah, I think the key part of that is utilizing those real examples. When you talk to those leaders, take advantage of those opportunities when they arise. And I think the other part of that is walk through the logical sequence of events of things occurring, right? What can occur with how things are, and what can occur if they were different, right? If it's, we need to, remove local administrators from workstations, right? You say, let's play that out, what an incident would look like if a person does have that versus what they don't. And knowing the organization's worst case scenarios helps you illustrate how what you want to support and suggest leads to that not occurring, right? They don't want to have to make that phone call in that example, right? This is going to help you never have to make that phone call or be as likely as possible to have to take that action, right? In those worst case scenarios happening.
Luke, this was awesome. Thank you. I'm curious about, like, you talked about an inventory of, you know, understanding what assets you have, and it made me think, like, what incidents should you be prepared for? What's a good way to know, like, okay, we're coming up with playbooks. What should those playbooks be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when I'm thinking about it, I think it's definitely associated with, you know, I spoke a couple times about with the healthcare example, PHI is kind of the critical asset, right? Knowing that it lives in a database, right? You kind of focus on database scenarios that and everything around those logs, the access into them. That certain assets are going to live in certain types of infrastructure and resources, and so I think you can start to anticipate and create playbooks around those types of resources. You know, if it's intellectual property in a file, maybe your scenarios you're thinking about are file servers, right? File server scenarios around how do I get at logs there, and is it certain components and folders and shares, right? And so that's how I think of it in my mind, is where did your most critical assets live, in what type of resources, and focus time around things of that nature.
That's interesting. So you start with you start backwards in a way, right? With, like, imagine you almost start with, okay, we need to protect this asset. What are the scenarios in which we would have an incident involved with this, right? Because I guess I go to thinking, like, well, what happens when this, you know, an end user's laptop is compromised, right? And that's kind of starting from the attack on how they potentially could get to valuable.
I like the attack chain, like, kind of mental model, where you know, a workstation or an account of someone are usually just stepping stones on the way to your most valuable assets. You know, your account or my account could be a hugely valuable stepping stone towards those things, but ultimately it's that thing at the end of the attack chain that needs to be protected. And so I think it helps to look at it from both angles, but I like to think of it from like the critical asset. All right. Any other questions or conversations people want to have?
Before we close this meeting for this quarter, does anyone have any specific requests on topics they'd like to be covered in future OWASP events?
You know, I think I'd like to hear about some web application firewalls. I want to hear about more OWASP tools. I want to hear about a whole lot of stuff. So I'm excited to hear what anybody comes up with.
Yeah, same. Well, Luke, I really appreciate it, and I know everyone appreciates you taking the time to put this presentation together. You are in the middle of moving across the country, and you still had time to give us a full incident response plan. So we appreciate it. And I think that will do it for this quarter. Thank you, everybody, and everyone have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks all.
Thanks for the presentation, Luke.
Thank you.